She'll be famous around the world. Her picture will appear in every paper. Her clothes will be copied and her jewels.
But she won't have chosen the man she married.
Plenty of people who have a free choice live to regret it.
Welcome back to the official Gilded Age podcast, where every week we dive into the stories and the history behind the HBO series, The Gilded Age. I'm Tom Meyers from the Bowery Boys podcast, and I am joined, as always, by my friend, Alicia Malone from TCM. Hi, Alicia.
Oh, hi, Tom. Sorry, I just happened to have this TCM branded mug just standing by. Anytime you mention TCM, out it comes. But it's so nice to see you again. And I'm excited to delve into episode 2 because episode 1 was a lot, jam-packed, full of setup. We had, the introduction of themes that we started season 2. We had introduction of new themes. And now in this episode, we get a little bit of an idea of where we might be going.
We had an heiress on the run when we last were on the show. So, I mean, where are we going to go from here? Yes, there's a lot happening already in that first episode.
Yeah, and a lot happening in this episode too, because we got to sit down with Carrie, Coon, and Morgan Spector, who play Bertha and George Russell. Carrie Coon is a hoot, had so much fun with her. And then we also talked with the executive producer and director, Michael Engler, who's become something of a friend to the show because this was his 3rd time on the podcast.
But first, I think you and I need to talk our way through episode 2 of season 3, which is entitled What the Papers Say, written by Julian Fellows and Sonia Warfield, and directed by Deborah Kampmeyer. Well, the episode begins over at the Russell house, where there is just quite a commotion, Alicia, because Miss Gladys has disappeared in the middle of the night. And, everybody from the downstairs staff is frantically running around the Russell's house, yelling out, Miss Gladys, and looking for this heiress on the run. And I don't know about you, but I actually kind of enjoyed this chance to look into these rooms, to see these rooms empty, and sort of, there's a long hallway shot. We got to see in the dining room, kind of look around these beautiful rooms in a way that we haven't before.
Yeah, exactly. I love the cinematography of this opening montage because they use wide angle lenses, which allows us to really look at these rooms and see them in their full form. There is that beautiful shot of a staircase with the servant sort of looking down, peering around. It's composed so well. It looks like a photograph almost. And then that crane shot. I'm sure every director loves to use a crane. And here it starts with Adelheid running next to the stairway. She comes down the stairs, open up, big sweeping shot, and all of the main staff meet her at the bottom of the stairs. It's a beautiful moment to start the episode.
When they get to the bottom of the staircase, everybody's kind of like, who's going to tell Mrs. Russell? And clearly nobody wants to tell her. I wouldn't want to tell her that Gladys is missing. It seems, though, it all falls onto Larry's shoulders, who wakes up his mother. And before we know it, Bertha is over at the Carlton's house, where the lovebirds have, been waiting for her rather anxiously. Gladys, by the way, is wearing a fabulous feather in that cap as she waits for her mom. And, they're telling themselves that they're going to be very strong.
Yeah, and that does not last long because straight away Bertha tells Gladys to get in the carriage and wait for her, and Gladys caves pretty quickly. I guess you can't get in the way of Bertha when she is determined like that. And we have a moment between Mrs. Carlton and Bertha where they're each talking about their daughter and their son and this possible love match. And Mrs. Carlton says she's going to pull rank, and out she pulls the fact that her family is connected to the Declaration of Independence. She says a great-grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence, which I imagine would have been a big deal.
Oh, that would have been a major deal, and I think that people would have pulled rank. I'm very happy that Mrs. Carlton pulls rank. Mrs. Carlton, played by Broadway star Victoria Clark. It's a fun scene. I was rooting for Mrs. Carlton there. But yeah, I think this is something that really would have happened because, to have an ancestor who was an actual signer of the Declaration of Independence was a big deal, right? And who was Mrs. Carleton talking to? She was talking to Bertha Russell, whose ancestors came from where again? You know, this is something also, by the way, this kind of rank is something that we saw Aunt Agnes remind Marion of in season 1, where she says, never forget that you are descended from the Livingstons, right? Also, signers of the Declaration of Independence. So people flaunted this. I think this is very true. And Bertha here just has to deal with it. And I don't know about you, but I thought that Bertha was like laughing in Mrs. Carleton's face, right? We see her laughing.
She's not impressed at all by the Declaration of Independence. I think it speaks to the fact that Bertha seems to be so entranced by the English way of life, the European way of life, and their titles. She's more interested in a duke than the Declaration of Independence. America is old hat to her. And George arrives back home. He immediately goes into a meeting with JP Morgan, who warns George that the timing is bad, the risks are enormous for his railroad, the panic is coming. So let's talk about the real JP Morgan and his connection to the railroad business, because I was reading how he actually helped to keep several rail lines alive following the panic, and he ended up being a major player in that industry.
He was, yeah. He was a major player in that industry and in other industries, some related, others, banks, etc. He had a lot of power because he had a lot of knowledge, inside knowledge of how particular businesses worked. And he acted on all of that knowledge and made himself very, very wealthy. And case in point, in the 1870s, he actually helped sell off a lot of shares of the New York Central Railroad, the Vanderbilt line. And in the meantime, put himself on the board of directors of that railroad. So he had firsthand knowledge of what was going on with that railroad, but he was also involved with other railroads who were quote unquote competitors. So that's how Morgan operated. He was able to sit on boards, merge companies together, create what we might call monopolies or trusts. He made things more efficient in order to limit competition and make things more profitable for these companies.
So it makes sense that George would be turning to JP Morgan for support if he was in the real world.
Absolutely, because Morgan was actually concerned about the overdevelopment of the railroad industry in the 1870s and the 1880s, factors that led to the Panic of 1884. That really did happen. So he was concerned that these companies were taking on too much debt. And here we have, George talking to Morgan about this grandiose new plan, which sounds very, very expensive.
I have a vision. A railroad that will transform this country, and perhaps the world.
An illusory vision.
I want to connect all the major cities of America, to create a continuous line from New York to Chicago and then from Chicago to California without 10 stops along the way. It can be done.
Perhaps. But you say it too easily. This will be a feat to rival Moses parting the Red Sea. You think you have a problem getting round Morenci. Wait till you start trying to rearrange Chicago.
Yeah, wait till you start to rearrange Chicago, Alicia. So this thing that George was talking about building was new. It was a coast-to-coast rail line that got there without a bunch of stops along the way. And that would also have been extremely expensive to build. And there would have been so many obstacles, and it was very, very risky. And as Morgan points out, it would take more money than he knew George Russell had.
Yeah, and JP Morgan said that he will do what he can. And George is very focused on the rewards, right? Big risks, but big rewards. Meanwhile, George doesn't only have his business to worry about because he steps right into the middle of a fight between Gladys and Bertha. Gladys wants him to essentially protect her from her own mother. And we get an idea of Bertha's scheming, the depths she's going to go to in order to organize a wedding between Gladys and the Duke. There's an announcement in the paper that seems to say that this engagement is all but a done deal. We see that the Duke is coming for another visit and they're going to be staying at the Russells. And meanwhile, George is a little unsure about Bertha's intentions, isn't he?
And a little unsure about how all that information got in the papers, too. Which brings us back to the episode's title, What the Papers Say. Because did you notice there's a lot of newspaper reading that's going on in this episode? People, Larry's reading upstairs, the staff is reading downstairs. Somehow that information is getting leaked to the press about the Duke's visit.
Yeah. So now, Tom, I think it's finally time for us to start to dip our toes into the true story that inspired this whole Gladys and Duke arranged marriage plotline, and that is the marriage of Consuelo Vanderbilt to the 9th Duke of Marlborough. And I'm so confused by the Vanderbilt's family tree. I keep looking at it being like, okay, wait, does Cornelius is happening. There's a lot of Williams happening in this family. But basically, Consuelo was the daughter of Alva Vanderbilt and William K. Vanderbilt. And she was the great-granddaughter of Commodore Vanderbilt. And from what I've been reading, Alva was just a completely domineering presence in Consuelo's life.
And Alva raised her daughter Consuelo really, to be a sort of first-class heiress, who would proved to be irresistible to European aristocracy. And by the way, if you find the Vanderbilts confusing in terms of family lineage, wait till you get to the Dukes of Marlborough.
Oh, boy.
It's also a bit confusing.
Yeah, he's the 9th. It's very confusing.
Right.
But at your suggestion, I've been reading the book Consuelo and Alva Vanderbilt by Amanda Mackenzie Stewart, which I have to say is a great read, completely fascinating. It's all about the relationship between Alva and Consuelo, using her wedding as sort of a centerpiece and perhaps the ultimate example of how Alva treated Consuelo as her living doll, living in a dollhouse, doing exactly what she wanted her to do. And I've also been reading Consuelo's own memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, which is also very interesting and one that you told me about.
And it's nice when you're reading The Glitter and the Gold to also read other accounts, because there are, of course, some things that Consuelo much later in life didn't want to include in that memoir. But it is amazing and often cited as a first-hand source material for this story. And I am really happy that this story is being folded into this episode. There is a little bit of poetic license being taken here, just in terms of timeline, because at the time of our story here, we know that we are in 1884, as we have discussed. But in 1884, Consuelo would have been 7 years old. But the real-life marriage between Consuelo and the Duke of Marlborough took place in 1895, so 11 years later.
Okay, got it.
But that aside, there are just so many interesting parallels in the story that we're seeing on screen here, starting with the fact that Consuelo was, in fact, deeply in love with somebody else.
Yeah, the real-life Billy Carlton.
That's right. In real life, his name was Winthrop Rutherford, and he was at least as socially prominent as Mrs. Carleton. He could have pulled rank, actually, on Mrs. Carleton, because Rutherford's ancestors also went back to a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and there was also the first governor of Massachusetts. He was even descended from Peter Stuyvesant himself, the last and the greatest of the directors of New Netherland. So, I mean, that's some rank to pull.
That is. And, being a wealthy heiress, Consuelo had many proposals over the years, all of which Alva turned down on her behalf without even consulting her. But it sounds like Rutherford would have been a good prospect for her.
He would have been, but it seems that Alva had other plans for her daughter. But there is something else, Alicia, and I don't want to get too far ahead of our story here. But earlier in the same year, in 1895, earlier that year, Alva had divorced her husband, William K. Vanderbilt. And many historians speculate that had Alva just let her daughter marry another New York socialite, well, that wouldn't have done much for Alva. But setting her daughter up to marry a duke, I mean, that would be a very effective way for Alva to maintain her spot at the top of society, despite the fact that she had caused a scandal. Following the divorce in March of 1895, Alva took her daughter abroad, took her for the social season in Paris and then up to London. And with the intention that Consuelo would meet the most eligible bachelors in European aristocracy at the time. Well, Consuelo and the Duke had actually met the previous year in 1894 when Consuelo was touring Paris and then London. They dined next to each other, but nothing came of it But the next year in 1895, at a ball in London, the Duke asked Consuelo for several dances, and they were off. Alva's plan kicked in.
Which needed a lot of money to keep up, right? To survive.
And where was he going to find that money?
I don't know.
And then Alva invited the Duke to come and stay with them back in Newport that summer. So he was invited back, and he accepted that invitation and, you know, prepared to come back that summer to Newport and stay at the Vanderbilt's Marble House. And yeah, the whole thing was followed obsessively in the newspapers.
Well, yes, because Consuelo's marriage was the most famous of the arranged marriages that happened during the Gilded Age. But by the time that she wed, this was not a new idea. You know, wealthy heiresses from America marrying into titled English or European families. They were even given a nickname, weren't they? The dollar princesses.
Which is a term that strikes me as a bit demeaning, but there was something undoubtedly transactional, right, about these relationships. In most cases, these wealthy families wanted social prominence, and the titled families in Europe, well, they wanted the cash, often to keep up these huge estates.
Yeah, and this had been happening for a while.
That's right. Several of these marriages actually predate Consuelo's marriage to the Duke in 1895. One that I will mention was Jenny Jerome, who was born in Brooklyn to a wealthy Brooklyn family in the 1850s. And she ended up marrying Lord Randolph Churchill, which made her Lady Randolph Churchill. And in, by the way, 1874, she gave birth to a son, Winston Churchill.
The future Prime Minister of England, and as played in movies by actors like Gary Oldman and Richard Burton. That's where I get all my history from. The
Let's
movies.
see that TCM. Let's see that cup again.
You can see those movies on TCM. But it's interesting to me that Alva essentially forced her daughter to marry a man that she didn't love. That seems quite regressive on her part. And yet, Alva was a leading figure later on in the suffrage movement. So my question is, do you think Alva realized that Consuelo marrying the Duke was a rare opportunity for her daughter to actually get some power in this world? Or was it about getting power for herself? I mean, I guess this is the question we have about Bertha, right? Like, what are the motivations here?
Right. This is the question we have about Alva. It's the question that you're reading about in these books. It's the question that we're watching on the show. I mean, whose power is it? You know, it's pretty clear that Gladys is going to have power if she does get married to the Duke here. But, I mean, what about Bertha? What do you call the mother of a duchess, Alicia?
One lucky woman. That was a really good line there, piece of dialogue. Well, all throughout this episode, we see how George is kind of stuck in the middle between his wife and his daughter. This is causing conflict between husband and wife. And there's a great scene earlier in the episode where Bertha likens his business to hers, her business being marrying Gladys off to the Duke.
I just want to know when I get a say in our daughter's life.
The day I'm in your boardroom giving you my ideas on the railroads and the steel mills. Until that day, I won't question your business if you don't question mine.
Oh, Bertha is quite ruthless in this episode, isn't she? She is determined to make this happen, determined to get her way, and does treat it like it is her business.
Well, it was a business, right? And of course, there had always been some kind of business aspect to dowries that were paid out in the event of marriages. So in a sense, it's not a new concept. I think what makes it new now in the 1880s is, with these dollar princesses, is that we're talking about vast fortunes, right? Bigger fortunes than had ever been seen in Europe or in the United States. And these fortunes were being leveraged to secure marriages between these rich daughters and these titled aristocrats. I mean, this was new.
Well, plenty more to come on this whole topic, I'm sure, as we delve more into the series. But let's jump back to 61st Street, where Dorothy and Arthur Scott arrive to see their sick daughter. And there's a moment where Dorothy is unsure about going through the front door.
Yeah, there is a quick standoff between Arthur and Dorothy here. And you can see that Dorothy is primarily concerned about getting in to see her sick daughter. But Arthur's principles would just not let them go through the servants' entrance. And he points out that he's been invited, right? Fortunately, somebody comes and sort of clears up the situation right away.
Yes, a Dr. Kirkland arrives. New character alert. Wee, wee, wee.
Ding, ding, ding.
He's played by Jordan Donica, and he goes up to see Peggy while Agnes talks to the Scotts. And Agnes is still shocked about her doctor refusing to see Peggy. And Arthur simply tells her, "You're a wise woman. You know how the world works."
I love how we saw it in season 2, but we're seeing it again. We're seeing Arthur push the envelope a little bit. And it makes his wife, it makes Dorothy very uncomfortable. We see she kind of gives a strained smile, right? And sort of taps his knee a little bit like, here, honey. And I think that Dorothy tries to take a smoother approach with Agnes.
Your attitude is not what we are used to, especially on Fifth Avenue.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But you know it to be true.
Maybe, but it is not how we were raised. We were brought up to be well-mannered towards everyone, and that is what I believe in. Simple good manners.
I agree.
I'm not convinced good manners will prove an effective cure for 2.5 centuries of slavery.
To her credit, I suppose, I mean, Agnes responds with a no, I suppose not, right away. But that's a sort of tense exchange. It had me kind of on edge because Dorothy had been trying to avoid a conflict, right? But not Arthur. And he seems to take direct aim at Agnes's kind of empty niceties. Especially when he said, "When did you feel the urgency?"
Yeah, he's not going to let her off the hook. And Agnes's reaction reminded me of a scene in Get Out where the white character says, "I would have voted for Obama for a third time." It's like Agnes is progressive in some ways for this time. She hired Peggy. She's kind to the Scots, but she cannot comprehend the type of prejudice that the Black community faced constantly.
I think that is what exasperates Arthur, right? Because it is her ignorance that ultimately put his daughter's life at risk. And it seems like he's having a hard time forgiving her for that.
Yeah, and Dr. Kirkland is upstairs taking care of Peggy. I was wondering how common Black doctors were at this time, because I imagine it must have been incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for Black students to be accepted into a traditional medical school.
Right. And as we touched on last week, up until this point, medical care and medical education were segregated. Up until 1868, only a handful of northern medical schools admitted Black students. And, but it was not common. In fact, it was in 1868 that Howard University in Washington, D.C. established a medical school expressly for the training of African-American doctors. Other schools would soon follow suit, but I do want you to consider this. In 1895, there were only 385 Black physicians in the United States, 385, and only 7% of them had graduated from white medical schools. So the vast majority of them went to one of these all-Black medical schools.
We also have to talk about Larian for this week. We need our Larian update. There was a big update this week. Steamy kiss alert.
Ding, ding. Yes, that was gutsy, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, kudos also to Larry. He must be a New Yorker. He spotted that cab down the block. I actually had to rewatch the scene twice to sort of see exactly what happened there. Did you see? So the driver gets out with the lady and he's carrying her boxes and he just notices that the back seat is available. So he just leads her over and they go for it. That was gutsy of him.
But also it was great to see that Larry has finally decided to include Jack in their business meetings about the clock. And he takes Jack to get himself a new suit, also teach him the ways of being a gentleman.
That's a cute scene too. And now we know that Larry doesn't show a lot of handkerchief when he wears a suit.
Let's talk about this YWCA benefit that Aurora held at her house. Firstly, what was the YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association?
That's right. It was an organization that started in England and then moved over to the United States in the late 1850s. It became known as the Young Women's Christian Association in 1866. And its purpose was to, address the various pressing needs of women, especially those who were joining the workforce during the Industrial Revolution. And of course, it's still around today. In fact, it's active in more than 100 countries.
Well, Aurora didn't want to cancel this benefit, so she pretended that Charles was sick. But then who comes walking in the door but...
Yep. Charles walks right in with the bell party, I think we hear. And of course, notably with a Mrs. Lipton. And Mrs. Astor's eyes in the scene say it all, right? She looks kind of disgusted, right? As she sort of takes it in, and it sinks in that she has been lied to, right? And that there is something going on with Aurora Fane's marriage.
Yeah, and Charles, once again, was needlessly cruel, telling Aurora that, of course, he brought his mistress there because we go everywhere together. It seems like he is really trying to force her hand to file for a divorce. But I was really happy with Agnes in this scene because when he referred to her as Aunt Agnes, she says, "I'm not your Aunt Agnes anymore."
And she's fuming. I mean, you see her like shooting, poison darts from her eyes. I mean, she is mad at her nephew. And honestly, what was he thinking? Is he like just clueless?
Well, there was a lot happening at this party. John Adams is there, and he says to Oscar that he still cares for him, and he wants to help Oscar out of what Oscar calls his innermost circle of all hell. He decides to give him money to invest and restart his own business.
I like their chemistry. I love the scene. I like the way that John smiles at Oscar and says, "Don't pout." Right? It's cute. He also professes his love to him, which would have been extremely bold for one man to do that to another in 1884. But that is great. I'm all for it. It's great. Speaking of bold, we also have Mrs. Carleton at that party who approaches Bertha one more time to try to persuade her to just, let the kids have a chance.
I do not know how many times I have to tell you this, Mrs. Carleton, but Gladys will not marry your son.
Isn't it out of our hands?
Let me speak clearly. If you keep this up, Mr. Russell will see that Billy never gets another job, and we will disinherit Gladys.
You do that to your own child? What sort of a person are you?
As a rule, I'm the sort of person who gets what she wants.
Ooh, Tom, I was shocked at this moment that she said she would disinherit Gladys. I don't know if that was just an empty threat to scare Mrs. Carleton, but I thought, wow, Bertha is really not holding back.
She's ruthless. And, and then we see the plan, Billy and Gladys's plan, sort of like kick in here. We see him walking down the hallway. Gladys is like, it's happening. And she runs down, and it's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, he stands there at that door. He looks up. He sees all the titans of industry together in one room, and he feels very small and just kind of looks down at his shoes and says, "Excuse me," and sort of pushes through the crowd, kind of defeated.
Yeah, it's sad for poor Gladys. I mean, she realizes as she sees Billy leave that he doesn't even acknowledge her, and Billy and Mrs. Carleton rush out of the party, which gives us our favorite line of this episode, as Mrs. Carleton says,
"I regard it as a lucky escape. What a ghastly gathering."
Ghastly gathering.
It was a ghastly gathering, Alicia. It was ghastly. I mean, that was a hot mess of a gathering, and it was a narrow escape for Billy.
Yeah, I think whenever I go to a party that I don't enjoy, which honestly is most parties, I'm just going to leave and say, what a ghastly gathering. And that all brings us to the last part of the episode, where the Russells are waiting for the Duke to arrive. And Billy comes back for one last scene, and he meets Gladys at the secret meeting spot, the servants' entrance.
"Gladys, I'm a tiny cog in the wheel of industry. I cannot afford to challenge the people driving it."
No, he's not even going to try, Tom.
No. He realizes that their love is, quote, no longer practicable. I was happy that he used the word practicable. It's the right word. But yeah, he is not the man that she needs him to be. And that is heartbreaking.
And that's the moment when the Duke arrives with his lawyer, which underscores the fact that this is all business.
And her look says it all. I mean, when he says to her gently, Gladys, we have much to look forward to. She looks like she's seen a ghost. She is just like white.
Yeah, you can see that she's been crying, and there's a moment where it looks like the Duke is actually taken aback by how scared she seems. And, you know, George at that moment also realizes the full extent of Bertha's ambition and that she has not, in fact, told him the full story about this.
There's something here that's a little bit childish about Bertha. She's been playing, she's been caught, and we're going to have to wait and see if she still gets her way.
Yeah, did you see her face when she takes the Duke's arm into dinner? She truly looks like the cat that ate the canary.
She looks like one lucky
lady.
That's right. Unfortunately, Gladys is frozen in fear, and George is just as surprised as she is. Alicia, this is going to be one awkward dinner.
Yeah, so awkward. I don't know what the conversation will be like around that table. Not a lot of laughs, but hey, it was not awkward, and we had a lot of laughs with our guests who are coming up next. How's that for a segue?
That's right. After the break, we will be sitting down with George and Bertha themselves. Morgan Spector and Carrie Coon will be joining us, and then we will discuss the show with Michael Engler, who is an executive producer on the show and also directed many of these episodes. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the official Gilded Age podcast. I'm Tom Meyers from the Bowery Boys podcast, joined by Alicia Malone from TCM.
Hello again. And now we get to the fun part of the episode. Not that the first part wasn't fun, talking to you, Tom, but really fun to sit down with Carrie Coon and Morgan Spector, who play Bertha Russell and George Russell. We've spoken to each of these actors individually over Zoom, but this time we got to go to the press junket and sit opposite them. Well, Morgan Spector, Carrie Coon, so nice to see you in person this time. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we're excited to be back for season 3. So I'm wondering, now you know your characters really well. You've worked together for a long time, but do you still get surprised when you read the scripts?
Delighted more than surprised?
Yes.
Actually, you know what? This season I did get surprised a couple of times.
Yes, I feel, because we've dispensed with all the exposition and now it's all just storytelling, which is fun. And also because we're welcoming in new characters now so frequently, and we knew we were going to get some real bangers off the Broadway. And so it was also thrilling to see who was going to fill these shoes. You know, you're like, Andrea Martin. You're like, of course it's Andrea Martin. You know, it's just really exciting all around.
Yeah, the characters, you're into the characters 3 seasons in. I'm wondering if sometimes, like, does it seep into your off-camera life at all? Are you, like yesterday we walked by 61st and 5th and we were like, hey, that's where it happened, kind of, right? Do you ever have those moments around town, or does the show come up in your life?
I would be divorced if it did.
I know, it's not like, these are not easy
I'm
characters.
not ready to marry off my daughter. She's only 3.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about it.
Soon.
I'm projecting onto her as much as I can. I think if I lived in the city, I think I would feel that more. And when I was working in the earlier seasons when I lived in Brooklyn, I feel like I had those spontaneous encounters more. But I live outside the city, so it's more like a longing for the thing. And also places that we've been now working for years. Like, we have such a routine when we go to Newport. We have our favorite restaurants in Troy. I have a relationship to New York that I didn't have before because of the places we go. Or I'll walk in. I remember walking into one of the houses in Newport, being like, "Oh, Mom, my foyer is better than this."
Your foyer.
My actual set, you know, it's like, mine looks like Grand Central Station. This is,
Yeah.
what is this? Tiny. Yeah. So I have that sort of pride about my pretend house.
No, I did a photo shoot in the Frick the other day and walked in and was like, oh, this looks like our dining room. Like, you know, this is the real thing that we copied.
Like, not impressive anymore. Well, episode 2 in season 3, we really start to get the sense of the depths of Bertha's ambitions for her daughter. So what do you think motivates Bertha? She says she wants the best for her daughter, but
I think that's true. Yes, she does. Now, you can disagree with how she goes about it or what she thinks that means. But for Bertha, what she wants and cannot have for herself is power, influence, impact. Her sphere is very limited, and she does not want that for her daughter. Nor does she feel that her daughter's life will ultimately be fulfilling without that probability. And so she wants her daughter, even though her daughter's not ready for it yet and claims she doesn't want it, she knows that, well, after 30 years doing the same thing every day, you might not feel that way. So she wants to keep those avenues open for her daughter to be a public figure, because that's what Bertha wants for herself. And she knows the world is not set up to take care of women. Women have to take care of themselves. They don't have the vote. They rely on men. They have to influence men to get what they need. And so she wants her to be in the upper echelon of society where she will be protected also, and where her rights will be protected. And if she gets any rights, she'll be first in line for those rights. So I think Bertha's actually quite noble in her effort. And she does feel that, she doesn't feel that little Billy is going to ultimately be like a stimulating partner for her daughter, who maybe isn't the person she sees in front of her. Maybe she wants more for Gladys than Gladys wants for herself, but that's what a mother wants. As much as she can get.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And it also is in service of our business interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that it's possible that Bertha is perhaps slightly blind to is the extent to which her own ego is displeased by her daughter's ascent to British nobility. Because, yeah, I mean, one sort of imagines that whatever freedoms she might enjoy as a duchess, she might also enjoy as like the child of the scion of like the richest family on the face of the earth. Just not splitting hairs or anything like that.
But there's an
difference.
avenue.
I understand.
There's also an avenue to lift us even that much higher, which is what I'm.
Yeah, the mother of a duchess, a lucky woman.
That's right. We're not exactly. He gets it.
Yeah.
But Morgan, you're talking about, maybe she should just be satisfied with what she already has. But that brings me to George. Maybe not being satisfied with what he has, right? I mean, Clay says in the first episode, why do you have to do this risky thing? Why can't you just be satisfied with palaces in Newport and New York?
There is something fundamental about a company like George's that if it's not growing, it's dying. And so there is a need to continually find avenues for investment, especially in this era. And yeah, I think the railroad, it was clear to people at this time that a transcontinental was inevitable. And the question was who was going to get there first. And so, the railroad was built long before there was actually a market for it, before there was a need for it. It was built chaotically and wastefully in real life because men like George just forced it on the world. And yeah, like what psychological need is George filling? I mean, I do think there's just a fundamental will to power that drives him and drives Bertha, and they express it in different spheres. But I do think that there is also a business case for trying to be sort of first to market with something to control the transcontinental railroad, because you're only going to build that so many times, and whoever really controls it is going to have tremendous power. Yeah,
legacy. But legacy. Looking out for your legacy.
I think there is something about there's certainly something about legacy. Yeah.
Just saying.
Whatever you need to tell yourself, it's all good.
I'm just saying.
Does this feel like couples therapy?
Yeah.
Oh, is that yeah. Keep going.
on the end, at the end.
Well, George's ambition really takes us out of New York. And we were watching the scenes in Morenci and wondering, where did you film that?
Long Island.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
No way.
Have you been to our backlot ever? Have you been?
No.
So yeah, we shot it there. It was really fun. Did you get to see it?
No, I didn't get to see it.
It was. I don't know if you've ever been like in a Western, but like there's
not yet.
I mean, there's nothing more Hollywood than walking onto a set that's got like that dust. We had like tumbleweeds and shit. It was like I was like, wow, I have arrived. Like we're really doing it.
Like
but yeah, we were just.
Got the shot of you stepping down into the dusty streets.
Yeah,
that's
the saloon with the swinging doors. It is just Hollywood.
And then it's winter in New York, then, isn't it? Isn't it juxtaposed with the snowballs and the
exactly? That's right. But it was hot. It was.
Oh yeah, you got to appreciate that.
And yeah, 61st Street is like 200 yards from.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, here we start to see that Bertha's ambition and George's ambition really starts to cause a rift with each other. There's a great moment in this episode where George says, when do I get a say? And Bertha says, when I come into your boardrooms.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you remember filming that scene or what it's like for you to play with this new dynamic between your characters.
I remember feeling that was really a truthful. I appreciated that writing so much because I think for a woman with ambition and nowhere to put it, that felt like a really truthful thing to say. It's like, oh, you want to have a say in this part? Well, then open the doors. Let me come into the boardroom.
Yeah.
Felt like a very real.
No, it is
conflict.
real. It is a real conflict, and my recollection is that in the scene, George kind of hears her on that.
I mean, you're preoccupied, of course, but
well, and I'm thinking about it now as we're talking about it. It is occurring to me that like the risk that Bertha is taking with the stability of their family by pursuing this avenue with Gladys, George is also taking. Because I mean, with the business, I mean, it's absolutely to the. I mean, it couldn't be higher stakes in terms of their business. And obviously, I mean, he's risking making them all penniless. So yeah, there's a certain amount of balance there in terms of the extent that they will go to pursue their various aims.
Yeah, it must be fun for you to play with those scenes as actors, going toe to toe with each other.
Yeah, always fun. When you have a good scene partner, it's always fun. I always look forward to my Morgan days.
Yeah,
and I miss
same.
Morgan when he's not there.
Me too.
Yeah, and you also usually get to really have dialogue scenes, which is always more interesting to dig into the shape of something. You know, when you come to work, you hope to really dig in a little bit. And I just always feel that. I mean, how much has really changed? I don't know. But I recognize like my own grandmothers, and their abilities. My mother, very smart woman. She was going to be a nurse or a teacher. Nothing wrong with that. But who knows what women would have chosen if they could choose. And so I felt that really emotionally, that's that statement, where we're allowed to be. And, how much has it changed? Where are we allowed to be?
Right. And you wanted something bigger than little Billy, as you said, for your daughter here.
I don't think he's going to cut it.
But there's a scene here, between Bertha and Mrs. Carlton, where you see Bertha possibly being a little reckless, too. I mean, you're saying that you would disinherit Gladys. You threatened to disinherit Gladys.
Yeah, well, we've ruined people before.
And to ruin Billy.
Yeah, we threatened to ruin the other guy.
Yeah, that other guy.
Archie.
Yeah. And now he's in the Hunger Games.
Oh, well, he did
the best thing we could have done for him.
We really, well, see, you never know how it's going to shake out. We're not so bad. Yes, I mean, yes, you use what's at your disposal. Threats.
Right.
Threats of disinheritance, sure. And Bertha is really against this marriage. She does not think that this will lead to fulfillment for Gladys. She thinks it's going to flame out. She thinks it's puppy love and that it's not going to be stimulating. And if Bertha needs anything, it's stimulation.
I will also say that I think Julian is on your side.
About the Billy.
About the Billy.
Because he's not. He doesn't show up.
No.
When he is asked to show up, he doesn't. So Bertha is right. He lacks some integrity.
Yeah, there's something that she's intuiting about him.
That's right.
That is accurate.
And what Gladys is capable of. It's not all about shoehorning Gladys. It's also about I want you to understand your capacity. You have more capacity than you believe in yourself. I don't know why.
God, that feels like something you should have said to her. If that's what you think.
Write the speech. But yes, you're right. I mean, we all have our limitations in communication with our family, don't we?
True.
Well, at the end of the episode, you see Gladys sort of being led to dinner like she's been led to her death. George realizes that Bertha has not told him the whole story, and he's kind of caught in the middle between the two, isn't he? He wants to fulfill his promise to Gladys for a love marriage, but also respect his wife's plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think George kind of sees the nuance of Bertha's position here a little bit, but he's going to have to watch his daughter's heartbreak in order to do this. I have a female child. I don't want to watch her
through her wedding.
Yeah, no, it's horrendous.
Yeah.
And yet, I don't know the position. I think George is really in an impossible position throughout much of the season. It's not. There's no good choice.
It's true. You are in a very difficult position.
Thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that. That's nice.
It's not easy what you're doing.
And you've come back from Morenci to find, the house really very argumentative.
Yeah, in uproar.
Right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She ran away from home.
Yes.
Rude.
Yeah.
Uncalled for.
Yeah. No, but I think he comes back to find that he's needed and that he needs to weigh into this situation and mediate. And he's frankly not able to do it very effectively because I don't think he can decide really where to come down here. Like the choice that he would have to make is really to say to Bertha, in order to protect Gladys, he would really have to say, no, you don't get to have what you want. This guy's going back to England. Forget it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. And he's just not willing to do that because I think he knows that Bertha that would be it. Like the two of them would be, she would, to defy her will to that extent, would sort of break a compact between them.
Mm-hmm. Right, and she would still be relentless in pursuit of it, even then somehow. Luckily,
pursue it without $1 in your little bank account.
That's true, yeah. But luckily, we have our golden child, Larry, will just swoop in and fix everything when it goes wrong.
Does that for me.
Saves
he
the
never
day.
fails.
Larry.
He just, whatever job we throw him in, he just shows
So
up.
good at it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why.
Real utility player.
It's amazing. And yet I won't let him marry the way he wants. That's fine.
Well, we love this season. So thank you both so much. Carrie, Coon, Morgan Spector. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. See you on YouTube.
Yeah. And Spotify now.
Oh,
Wherever you get your video
Oh, my
podcasts.
goodness.
Well, can't do much better than that, Tom. Carrie Coon and Morgan Spector. What I loved about that interview was the fact that they were each, especially Carrie, so determined about their characters. You know, Carrie sees nothing wrong with Bertha's intentions for Gladys. She is all in with supporting Bertha. And meanwhile, Morgan was looking at her like, are you sure? Is she truly that way?
Yeah, I love that they were all in. And it did feel for a moment there like we were in a couples therapy session.
Yes.
I mean, they were like smacking each other's arms and like they were fully invested, and I loved it. But speaking of invested, we're now going to be speaking to Michael Engler, who's an executive producer on the show and has directed many of the episodes this season and in previous seasons, to talk about what went on behind the scenes. Well, Michael Engler, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast for your third appearance. Welcome back to the show.
3 out of 3. Yes. 3 seasons. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And you are both an executive producer on the show, and you're also the director of many of the episodes this season. Can you remind our listeners what those two roles entail?
Well, as an executive producer, I'm involved in kind of aspects of the directing and production that affect all the episodes. So if we're going to be casting a character who's going to come in across many episodes, I'll be part of that, or building new sets or finding new locations and looking at kind of the things that will relate to more than one episode that, say, I am directing. It has to do with music. I work with the composers. I work with the visual effects supervisor on all those kinds of things, because they take a long time and have to be conceived over a longer period than just one director.
And we know that you also work very closely with Lord Julian Fellows. You have for many years, and obviously here in season 3. What is that relationship like?
He's got his own voice. And so for me, it's working with him, it's a combination of just feedback on sometimes differences in how we say things or look at things, or details, being American, looking at the show versus, looking at it from his point of view. And sometimes it has to do with just reconciling what he wants us to do and how we would do it in production. And so sometimes scripts need to adjust around those things. And so we'll talk about that in terms of how we would create some of these worlds that we have to really figure out, production wise, what we can achieve. So it has to do with that. And then just kind of tracking the story and the characters and the information, and giving him ideas of American actors who he doesn't know as well as we do, and just reacting to the stories. I think being another eye and ear for him on how things are reading.
Well, even just watching 2 episodes, I feel like the actors now feel really at home with their characters, with their costumes, on the sets. I'm wondering, what have you observed with them just stepping more into their roles?
I've noticed the exact same thing. Partly, I think it has to do with, at the beginning, there was so much that everybody had to learn, all of us, about the lifestyle, behavior, protocol, manners, diction and language, and all of that kind of stuff. I think there were a lot of technical details that they had to absorb at the beginning, and now they just feel effortless. It doesn't feel like they have to do any work to do them. And I think also understanding where their characters fit in the world and what their expectations are and the reality that they live in from their character's point of view.
I was astonished when Morgan told us that the Morenci scenes were shot out on Long Island. I was sure you were actually out in the West.
Well, you know what? All the scene work, all the things inside that little saloon and in the assayer's tent that comes later, and those kinds of scenes, that was shot in a kind of green screen world environment that we set up on our back lot out in Long Island, like right behind the 61st Street set. And that was kind of great. And then we had a second unit go out and shoot some stuff in New Mexico that we then put together for the wide shots and for the mountains in the distance and that sort of things.
We were saying last episode that by starting that way, it's also a reminder in some senses that George's fortune stretches way out. It's not actually just based there in New York, right? There are people and there's a whole country out there and it's getting bigger.
We wanted to also, just in this kind of subtle way, remind the audience that the Wild West and the Gilded Age are the same period. Mm-hmm. And the Wild West is where the money comes that pays for the Gilded Age. You know, it's logging and fur and, you know, all those resources, copper and the railroads and, you know, banking and investment. And so we thought that was a really nice way of kind of reminding us that actually George's world has, you know, fingers that stretch out into all those areas.
Well, being a bit of a film nerd, I always love to watch how each episode begins. This episode, for example, which I know you didn't direct, but it starts with some striking shots of the staff running through the Russell house, wide angle lens, a crane shot. And it seems to me that the opening shot is where the director gets to have a little bit of fun. Would that be true?
I think it's definitely true. We like to have in each episode the director find a way into the episode that reminds us sort of the bigger context of the world and also brings us into where the story begins at that point. So at this point in episode 2, Gladys is missing. Gladys runs off at the end of episode 1. That's the final shot. And so creating the intrigue in the house and how many people would know about it and the ripples that would get sent through the house before Bertha finds out.
Yeah, this episode was directed by Deborah Kampmeyer, and her, along with Sally Richardson Whitfield and yourself, seem to be the 3 main directors who direct the lion's share of the episodes. What's the advantage of having just a few directors rather than changing all the time?
I think it's true on any show. It's good to have a little group of people. And it's also nice often to have new people come in and bring fresh ideas to it. But this show, there's so many technical details, historical information to absorb and to include and to understand in terms of talking to the actors, that I think we found it's just easier to have people who've been through it and, you know, kind of been through the indoctrination program of the manners and the behavior and how clothes are worn and what happens at each time of the day in every house and how meals are served and all that. Because, you know, once that's out of the way, then the more interesting, useful conversations happen about what's really going on in the stories.
What has it been like working with Thaisa Farmiga, who plays Gladys, on developing the role of Gladys?
Well, Thaisa is an extraordinary actress, and I think she's finally being given. She's always had interesting things to do, but this season in so many ways is really driven by her story, or at least the first half of the season. And she just has such emotional complexity. And I think, you know, in her maturity as a person allows her to play this character who is so immature, so naive, so unaware of really how the world works, and has to learn it kind of at the center of, you know, all eyes on her. And so, you know, she just brings a natural grace and curiosity and vulnerability to it that makes it incredibly believable. And I think kind of you worry for her because you understand on a certain level she doesn't have the resources to take care of herself, to control her own future.
And were you having conversations with Thaisa around the Consuelo Vanderbilt story?
We all read about that story to different levels, and we all talked about it. And I think that kind of research is really useful in just getting inside the period and the expectations. And I think a lot of us, it's very hard today to understand the idea that a girl could be forced into a marriage. I mean, maybe you could understand it in medieval times or different kinds of other periods, but something so close to us. And I think what we really, really wanted to find in the scripts and with the actors is a believable path where she could legitimately feel like she had no other choice. Like it was the lesser of two evils, that her life and her position in society and her options could well be ruined if she handled this badly. And that Bertha's maneuvering legitimately put her in a place where she had, of course she had a choice, but the other choice could have potentially been to ruin her life, her future, her reputation.
And even when you are allowed to make a love match, it also could mean the ruin for your reputation, as we see with Aurora Fane. It's nice to see Kelly O'Hara getting to also have a big storyline this season. And divorce is a big theme. What really interested you the most about this subject?
Well, it's interesting because the season is so much about marriage and divorce. And really that, for both sides of that for us, are really about the power of women in that society and the level of agency that they have in their own lives, and they're determining their futures, their families, and the choices they have, so that it's not just a sense of anybody can do anything, which I think we have more of that sense today, but really, given the choices you have, what is the best future you can make for yourself? And if you decide to get married, even though it's maybe against your will or not the person you dreamed of marrying, or maybe it is, whatever sacrifices you make or decisions you make are going to have big ramifications in terms of your position in society. And it's the same with divorce. At that time, it would basically erase a woman's position in society. It would remove her from that. We were all interested, I know primarily Julian, we were all interested in looking at that aspect of women's power and agency. And really the only sphere they had power was in the home or marriage, and that kind of social sphere, as opposed to the business or political sphere. And so the choices they had to navigate their positions versus their own happiness.
Yeah, and even when it's not their fault, they could also be ruined by divorce. In this episode, we see everything come to a head at Aurora's YWCA benefit. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this ghastly gathering, as Mrs. Carlton says. There's a lot going on here, and I just felt so sorry for Aurora when Charles brings his mistress to her party.
That's right. It becomes the final trump card in his play for a divorce, which is letting her know that even though she holds the card to say yes or no about whether she will sue him for divorce, he can destroy her socially. And in the end, that's the upper hand that he has. And I think what's so brilliant about that scene, it's a long sequence, is that we're dealing with Billy Carlton trying to have a moment to ask for Gladys's hand, while Bertha is in every way she can thwarting that and leading it toward the Duke. And then we have these two potential divorces and scandals of marriages falling apart with Aurora and with Charlotte. And I think it just kind of puts in a nutshell, or it kind of boils down the reality of society, of marriage and your position in society are one and the same.
Well, and we've also seen this season, another shift in the social pecking order with the sudden reversal of fortunes at the Van Ryn house. And, Agnes is processing as well. Who is she if she doesn't have this fortune, and if her sister suddenly does?
That's right. And I think, and again, in that household, the theme, obviously everything overlaps, and that's what's so beautiful about this show, is how everybody's world intersects with everybody else's world. So while Marion is working on her romantic future potential marriage in that house, and so is Peggy, dealing with those issues, moving into marriage, and what does that mean, and choosing the person you choose, and is what obstacles come along with that. At the same time, we're dealing with, what does money do for you in society? Where does that put you? And so now, just as Agnes has lost all her money and Ada has suddenly become rich, so all the positions are shifting.
Yeah, and Oscar as well. Oscar is
That's
dealing
right.
with not having money, and here we see a potential way out thanks to John Adams. Did you always want to bring back John Adams?
Yes, we did. I mean, we love that relationship. We love that it has a kind of modern feeling to it, even though it has to be dealt with in a very 19th century way. But yeah, we thought that having Oscar have to become his own person and have to become worthy of his position in society rather than having just been handed it was an interesting story. And then to do it at the hands of his ex-lover, who was still such an intimate friend of his, would be particularly meaningful.
And the characters have to figure out how to react to those changes too. We saw Armstrong in this episode say, look, everything is changing. Everything I grew up knowing seems to be in question. This episode in particular had some very sort of, squirmy moments, right, where the characters were tackling racial prejudice.
That's
and you
right.
saw Agnes confronted with Arthur, especially Arthur, about some of these sensitive topics and her intentions, but were they empty? These are really big issues. So how does the show tackle things like that? These are big topics.
We first start by doing deep dive in the history of these communities and of specific people and of the legal issues, of the financial realities of these different communities. And once I think we understand that really carefully, then Julian and Sonia kind of craft the stories together of how that's going to be told and expressed. We in the production area will then look at how we can bring that alive. And then we just really kind of talk about each of our characters and where they've been and where they're heading and what are the most interesting opportunities for them to come across and obstacles to overcome in their pursuits.
Yeah, do you think about it in terms of how the themes relate to today, or is it just natural that history repeats itself?
We do think about it for sure. And I think it's one of our jobs all the time is to make a really interesting, clear distinction between what is the same today and what's different. And so as those things change, we want to make it really clear where we can, where the assumptions are different, about men and women and how they behave, and about, race and how that is managed in society in different environments.
So there was a long break between season 2 and 3 filming wise because of various strikes. What was it like for you to return to the set and see all the cast and crew again?
It was like walking into an old, comfortable suit. It was so easy and so fun. And I think, it's a hard show, it's a tricky show, and people are in hair and makeup and wardrobe for long hours, and there's long shooting hours, and those are hot clothes to be in. And, it's months of it, and it's just a lot. And by the end of the season, everybody is proud of the work they've done and kind of tired, ready for a break. But we had so much time in there. And I think that in some ways, the strike reminded everybody of what a rare, supported, delightful group of people and situation we have. And so everybody came back really happy to be together again and doing this.
And with all of those Broadway stars, we have asked you this before, point blank, Michael, but at what point could we possibly have a Gilded Age musical special episode? Could we just one episode? That's all we need.
I am not the one to ask. You have to drill hard, get, really twist Julian's arm. It would be crazy not to.
Well, we are really enjoying this season so far, and it's great to have you back. So thank you, Michael Engler, for your time.
Thank you, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Alicia, that was so cool. It is always so fun to have Michael Engler on the show to give us really a deep insight into how the show is organized, how it works, how they come up with and deal with all of these scripts, and even just the process of making the show.
Such a huge production. It takes so many people, takes a village. There's a lot of logistics that goes on, and you have to have someone like Michael at the top just overseeing everything. He's also just so fun to talk to. I mean, Tom, I feel like he's a friend now that we've spoken to him. This is our third time.
We've been so close for 3 years. I guess that is all for us today, Alicia Malone. But soon we'll be back with another episode of the Gilded Age podcast.
Yes, we'll have more interviews with the cast and crew, more banter, more facts, possibly more Larian.
More Larian, please.
We need more Larian. So make sure you watch the new episodes of the HBO original series, The Gilded Age, and then tune into the official Gilded Age podcast, wherever you find podcasts. And now, as a reminder, you can watch this podcast as well as listen to it. I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. This has been the official Gilded Age podcast, written, hosted, and produced by Alicia Malone and me, Tom Meyers.
The podcast is a production of HBO in collaboration with Pod People.
For Pod People, our supervising producer is Rebecca Chasson, associate producer is Sam Gabauer, and our video editor is Susana Vasquez. Special thanks to Hannah Pedersen and Amy Machado.
For HBO podcasts, our executive producer is Michael Gluckstadt, and associate producer is Aaron Kelly.